Hello there, my name is Mrs. Peters and I'm here to introduce to you a life-changing opportunity. Are you tired of searching for a job, or you are constantly being told that you do not qualify for a particular job due to lack of skill or experience? Then worry no more.
Good morning and welcome to Expert Global Consult. My name is Amade Solomon Ojodali, a safety specialist with over 8 years downstream oil and gas sector safety experience and 5 years training experience. Today, I'll be anchoring and handling a training session on health, safety, and environment. That is HSE level 1, 2, and 3. Who is this course for? This course is for supervisors. This course is for every member of the organization who is interested in creating an enabling environment in his workplace. Some of the topics we'll be talking about today will be HSE level 1, 2, and 3, introduction to occupational safety and health, what causes accidents, how do we prevent accidents, what are the importance of safety, incident investigation and analysis, and even risk assessment. Sit down and take a coffee, relax your mind, and we're going to have a very interactive and practical session this morning. Thank you and welcome. Good morning, class. You're welcome back to the Health, Safety, and Environment Training, HSE. We started yesterday by establishing some points, principles of HSE, policies, guidelines, and some methodologies deployed to what? Manage health and safety in an organization. We defined health as total well-being of an individual, physically, mentally, socially, emotionally, and what? Otherwise. We established the fact that safety means what? The complete, the total avoidance of danger, or we define safety as being free from harm or danger. And we now said yesterday that what causes dangers, what causes accidents. We say that accidents are caused by hazards, near miss, unsafe acts, unsafe behaviors, and unsafe conditions. And so for you to have an effective workplace that is safe, free from harm and danger, you need to take closer look or a close look at hazards, at near misses, at unsafe acts, unsafe behaviors, unsafe conditions. We went into unsafe acts auditing. We talked about job safety analysis or job hazard analysis. We talked about incident investigation and analysis. We equally talked about permits to work. We talked about the causes of fire. We talked about fire prevention principles and procedures. We talked about the classes of fire. We talked about some methodologies or some equipment to use to detect and suppress fire. Today we'll be looking basically at three things. We'll be looking at the environment. One, from the environment, we'll be looking at emergency response plan, which is first aid. Why do we need first aid? And we'll be taking a look at the practical class, which is a practical demonstration of what? Fighting fire. But before I go into environmental safety, before I begin to talk about basic first aid, or before I begin to talk about the practicals, let's look at the concept called HSE-MS. HSE what? MS. What is HSE-MS? HSE-MS means Health, Safety, and Environment what? Management what? Systems. Now, what do we mean by health, safety, management, health, safety, and environmental management system? This is talking about principles, policies, and guidelines, systems that are what? Deployed and set by organization to manage what? The safety. Most management system takes what? The same format or the same pattern, which is what I represent by an acronym called POPMA. What is POPMA? Talks about P stands for planning, organization, management and audits. Management and what? Policy. Policy what? Policy, organization, POPMA. Let me write out the acronym. It makes it easier for us. POPMA. This is what? Policy. This talks about the policy, organization, planning, monitoring and control, M and C, monitor. Monitoring and control. Last but not the least is what? Audit. Every organization will set out its safety policy. And that's why in every organization you find yourself, there must be what? Safety what? Policies. And these safety policies will always talk about what? The principles, the procedures, the guidelines, the responsibility of which organization and individuals within the organization will be spelled out. This commitment safety policy, the first thing we always talk about under most policies you find is what we call leadership, commitment, and what? Accountability. That means leaders, the leader or the manager of that organization or the CEO must be effectively committed to the what? The safety principles and guidelines within that what? Organization. We refer to it as what? We refer to it as what? Safety commitment. Every organization, leadership, commitment, accountability. The leaders in that organization must be effectively committed to what? The safety principles, policies, and what? Guidelines. They have to also make resources available to ensure that the safety framework within the organization is implemented. When we are talking about the organization, what do we mean by organization? There is purpose of statement of intent, and there is what we call what? Responsibilities of each individual. This is where you have the organizational chart that describes the function. Yesterday I talked about job description. In the organization, the duties and responsibility of everybody within the organization as it relates to safety is what? Carefully what? And carefully spelled out and carefully spelled out and detailed out. So that there will be what? Rewards for commitment to safety. There will be appraisals. There will be comments and commendations for what? Safety performance. That's why from time to time you hear for 5,000 working hours they are going to give this reward. For 10,000 working hours without any hazard they are giving reward. That comes under what? The organization of the safety principles and what? Guidelines. Then in planning, everything, every activity, the organization will need to what? Sit down and create a detailed plan of how the safety management principles will be monitored and what? Carried out. Then monitoring and control. I remember yesterday I talked about active monitoring and reactive monitoring. When do we say that monitoring system is active? We talk about active monitoring when the organization sits down to forecast or to foresee incidents before they what? Occur. But when you begin to what? React to incidents that have occurred, we refer to it as what? Reactive what? Monitoring. One of the reactive monitoring measures we carry out in safety is what we discussed yesterday, which is incident investigation and what? Analysis. Last but not the least, you conduct audits. Last but not the least, you conduct what? Audit. What is audit? Audit is what? Plan versus what? Actual. A systematic approach towards what? Checking the plan and what? The actual. What do you plan to achieve in safety? What do you plan to achieve in your organization? Then, what are the systems you have been put in place? What are the resources that have been committed? Who is responsible for what? At the end of the day, on a quarterly basis, biannually or annually, organizations engage in audits to check their plan versus what? The actual, to ensure that the policies, the planning, the monitoring and control are effectively what? Implemented. When we are talking about health, HSE-M, which talks about health, safety and environment management principle, another thing that comes into mind is what we call HEMP. But before I talk about the HEMP, let me talk about another aspect of the health, safety, and management system. One of the most common health, safety, and management systems you come across is what we call the plan. P, plan, do, check, and what? And what? Act. We call this, you see it as an acronym, PDCA. What is PDCA? It's closely related to what I have discussed. It is closely related to what I have discussed. Every management system, be it ILO, be it OSH management system, be it the HCC management system, all of this management system follows the process of planning, doing, which is implementation, checking, and what? Act. What does it mean to plan? In every activity we carry out in life starts from what? A plan. The plan details out what? The safety expectations of the organization. The plan also details out the method of implementing safety principles, policies, and guidelines. In the plan also, we also talked about the cost implementation of implementing safety principles, policies, and what? Guidelines. So under the planning phase, you sit down to identify your safety needs. You also sit down with your organization to identify the need for safety, the procedures for safety, the catalogs that are going to be deployed in managing health, safety, and environment, the individuals that are going to be responsible, their level of responsibility, their level of authorization, the informations required, the training required, the supervision required for managing what? Health and safety within what? The organization. Now, from the planning section, you move to the point of implementation, which is the do. As individuals, we all have plans, true or false. Now, the doing becomes what? Implementation. Do here means what? Implement all the plans you have put into what? Place on paper. In your planning also, you are going to develop what? A timeline. When should we carry out what? Each activity within the what? Plan. This talks about what? Implementation. And this check talks about what? The audit we what? Talked about. There's what we refer to as safe performance self what? Assessment. What is safe performance self assessment? I'll come back to that. But this check is more or less an audit. What is an audit? I said an audit is a check between the plan versus what? The actual. And whenever you conduct checks or an audit and you discover a gap, what is a gap? A gap is a deviation from the what? Plan versus what? The actual. And so when you discover that gap, you act to what? Close the gap and ensure that your plans are what? Effectively what? Implemented. That's the basics of HSE-MS. Another component we'll look at under HSE-MS is what we call HEMP. What is HEMP? It's also an acronym. HEMP. This talks about what? The HSE-M talks about hazard effect management what? Principle. Hazard effect management what? Principle. We said that the centerpiece of safety is what? Hazards. For you to have a safe work environment, you must identify all these hazards and place them under control. Now, yesterday we mentioned that hazard is anything that has the potential to cause harm to environment, to people, to machinery, and even to facility. And we went on to identify the different classes of hazards, which are physical, biological, ergonomics or machinery hazards, economic hazards, biological hazards, chemical hazards, and what? Psychological hazards. Now, what are the effects of these hazards? And so when a hazard is what? Identified, you now move from hazard to what we refer to as what? Risk assessment. And I said that the risk assessment is conducted using what? The risk assessment template. And I did say that risk assessment is what? A risk is the probability that a hazard will cause a harm and the severity of the harm it will cause. So when you identify a hazard, you move from hazard identification to what? Risk assessment. Now, the risk assessment is telling you what? The effects of the hazards. So you need to identify the hazards, identify who or what is at risk, evaluate the hazards, profile solutions, and write what? Your recommendation. What does this mean? When a hazard is identified, for instance, you have what? In a construction company, you have what? An uncovered manhole. That is what? A physical what? Hazard. You evaluate the hazard. Who are at risk? If a manhole is left uncovered, who is at risk? The people at risk there are the workers within what? The organization. There could be slip, there could be trip, there could be falls. When you have an unguarded machinery, for instance, you are working in the oil and gas sector, or maybe you have an unguarded machinery. What is the effect of an unguarded machinery? The effect is what? Entanglement. Puncture or stab if anybody comes around what? That machinery. You could have a worker within your premises who is working with a machine. These machines that are used to what? Carry out demolition. I'm trying to remember the name, the jackhammer. What are the what? Hazards. Or what are the risks associated with the use of a jackhammer? One of the hazards or the risk associated with the use of jackhammer is whole body vibrations. You can also have issues of splinters within your palms using a jackhammer. There's what is also referred to as what? Work-related upper limbs what? Disorder. Or in agriculture, you see a worker driving a tractor from morning till evening. He's exposed to what we call whole body vibration. Or on the construction site, you see a forklift driver driving a forklift that has what? No reverse alarm. That is what? These are hazards. Examples of what? Hazards. What are the effects? You now need to find out. In finding the effects, you are now going to define who is at risk. When such hazards are what? Identified, you need to evaluate who is at risk, identify who is at risk, evaluate the hazard by assessing it, implementing effective controls, and recording your findings and your what? Your recommendation. The management of the hazard and the principles that will be deployed in managing the hazard all boils down to the hierarchy of risk controls that we talked about. Under this hazard effect and management principles, there is another principle or policies and guidelines that organizations deploy. One of such principles and guidelines is what we call identify, assess, control, and what? Recovery. You identify the hazards, you evaluate the hazards, you implement either mitigative controls or preventive controls, and what? You recover. What does it mean to recover? You definitely have to check if your controls you have implemented are effective or not effective. For instance, if a man is working with a jackhammer, or there's oil on the floor, you have identified that as what? A hazard. The next thing you need to do is to evaluate who is at risk. If there's an oil on the floor and a worker identifies that as a hazard and he goes to cover it with rags or covers it with a plywood or covers it with a carton, has he done enough? No. Because somebody can still step on that hazard and still fall to the ground. Or you determine sharp objects or pinch points on a conveyor. You need to find out who is at risk, who are the ones making use of the conveyor, and how to what? Effectively guard that conveyor from people getting what? Entangled with such hazards. That talks about identify, assess, control, and what? Recover. In summary, or in a nutshell, when you carry out what? Risk assessment, the goal of the risk assessment is to identify the hazards, evaluate who is at risk, evaluate the risk, and implement what? Control. The next thing we are going to talk about is what? Environmental safety. With this background, we are going to look at environmental safety today. We are looking at what? Environment. What is the environment? And why do we talk about environmental safety? Why do we need to protect the environment? What are the issues or the hazards associated with the environment? We started yesterday by saying that the environment is what? The totality of the surrounding in which we live. The totality of the surrounding in which we what? We live. The plants, the animals, the water bodies, the space, atmosphere, the biosphere, and even the forest. And so man and the environment what? Interacts. And you find out that there are so many what? Human activities that has destroyed the environment. And until these human activities are controlled, monitored, and evaluated, the environment will continually be degraded to the point where what? The quality of the life of man is also affected. So, how does the environment interact with what? Man. If you're careful search, you will find out that man breathes in what? Oxygen, and brings out what? Carbon dioxide, or carbon dioxide as the case may be. You find out that the carbon dioxide is used by plants in the course of manufacturing food. And plants also what? Give out what? Carbon dioxide. Oxygen. They also give out a byproduct of what? The process of photosynthesis is oxygen. And man takes in what? The oxygen. For what? The purpose of what? Respiration. So we find out that man and nature, his environment, interact for what? A healthy what? Life cycle. But there are so many activities of man that has destroyed the environment and destroyed man as much as possible. What are some of these activities? Or what are some of the effects of what? Environmental degradation that we see in our day. Number one is acid rain. Number one is what? Acid rain. You find out that as a result of excessive what? Burning or excessive human activity, oxides leave the face of the earth, move into the atmosphere, mix it with water, and comes back to us as acid rain. What are the effects of this acid rain? They are cancerous. You hear a lot of issues of cancer in our society today. They cause respiratory tract infections. They cause what? Respiratory tract infection. They cause skin irritation and even skin what? Cancer. Another one is ozone layer depletion. Ozone layer what? Depletion. The ozone layer is what? A thin foliage that covers the earth or from direct rays of sunlight. But today, as a result of human activity, the ozone layer has been destroyed to the point where we are experiencing what? Direct rays and heat from the sun. Then you have the issues of what? Global warming. You find out that in some areas in Nigeria today, immediately after the rain, it becomes hot again as if rain has not fallen. Why? Because of what? The activities of man has led to what? Global issues of what? Global warming. Then when you go to areas that are highly industrialized, you see a lot of gas flaring that is going on in our society. These gas that we have been flaring for over a very long period of time have their negative tendencies on what? Human beings. Now, how do we manage the environment? Having discovered and having established that man in his activity, industrial activities, have done a lot of damage to the face of the earth. Apart from some of the industrial processes we have talked about, there's what we refer to as open defecation. You see people defecating everywhere. You hear of noise pollution everywhere. And so as a result of this damage to the society, it creates what? Negative effects on what? The environment. You look at today, 90% of the food we eat are genetically modified foods because the activities of man has destroyed what? Soil what? Fertility. And so what are the issues when managing what? Environmental safety. In our country today, we hear of what? Organic cleanup. Organic cleanup has been a major problem for a very long period of time, as much as I know in this country. You hear of places like Niger Delta, most especially in Nigeria. One of the major issues you find in the Niger Delta is the issue of what? Spillage, oil spillage that has destroyed what? Human lives. It has destroyed aquatic life. It has destroyed people's means of livelihood. It has destroyed what? Fishing career of people, and it has rendered the families of people living in such environment what? Destitute. So you find out that environmental pollution and environmental degradation is an issue we really need to take a look at in our society, in our organizations, and find out what are we doing or what are we doing wrongly to ensure that we create an enabling environment where the environment and the society is not completely what? Destroyed. You go to some organizations, what do you see? You see the exhaust of their generator going straight up, and you are releasing what? Oxides into what? The atmosphere. All these oxides you are releasing into the atmosphere comes back to us. Forms of waste. We have different forms of waste, and most times you have what? Either liquid waste or solid what? Waste. The liquid waste we refer to as sewage. The solid waste we refer to as what? Refuge. Other classifications of waste are municipal waste. Number one is what? Municipal what? Waste. When you are talking about municipal waste, you are talking about waste that is generated within what? A geographical location. Waste that is generated within what? A geographical location is referred to as what? Municipal waste. For instance, waste that is generated in a metropolis, in Abuja city center, for instance, in Asaba city center, in Warri, in Ugele, in Agbo, a waste that is generated in a geographical environment is referred to as what? Municipal what? Waste. From municipal waste, we talk about what? Industrial waste. When does a waste become industrial? And most times in the municipal waste, things that are generated in a geographical environment are mostly what? Refuse and what? Sewage. Now from there we talk about industrial waste. When you are talking about industrial waste, you are talking about toxic materials, chemicals, oxides that are generated within what? Industrial what? Production area. For instance, if you move to an area like Agbara Industrial Estate in close to Lagos, you find out that you see soot going up into the atmosphere. If you go to Port Harcourt here, you cover your nostrils with a white handkerchief. In 1 hour, the white handkerchief becomes black because of soot that are falling from what? The atmosphere. Apart from the municipal waste, industrial waste are waste that are generated in what? Industries. These wastes come in various forms. Exhaust into the atmosphere, discharge into the soil from what? Organizations. They form industrial waste that have negative effect on the society. For instance, if you find your way to Port Harcourt, for instance, you cover your nostrils with a handkerchief. In 30 minutes, 1 hour, the handkerchief becomes black because of what? The waste and the soot that goes into what? The atmosphere and comes back, which destroys aquatic life, destroys vegetation, is cancerous to man. It leads to what? Respiratory tract infections and other forms of what? Infections. Apart from industrial waste, there is waste that we refer to as what? Medical what? Waste. These are wastes that come from medical research and what? Medical hospitals and what? Clinics. Like samples from the lab. Like samples that are used in medical research. Samples from what? Hospitals and medical research are referred to as what? Biomedical what? Waste or medical waste. Then you have waste from biomedical waste, you have agricultural waste. But the good thing about agricultural waste is that they are biodegradable, in the sense that, meaning that they go back into what? The soil to be reused as what? Soil nutrients and what? Soil what? Fertility. Then we've talked about municipal waste, agricultural waste, we've talked about medical or biomedical waste, we've talked about industrial waste, and there are radioactive waste. Radioactive waste. Wastes that come from radioactivity, radiations, or from your common disposal of your phones, your fans, your electronic devices. Some of the components on your electronic devices contains lead. And when you throw them or dispose them into the soil, what happens is that that lead goes into the soil. The soil brings back those lead to us through what? The plants and the fruits that we what? Eat. And so you find out that the way and manner in which we dispose some of our electronic devices are issues we need to what? Carefully evaluate and look at. Now, after that, how do we manage waste? How do we what? Manage what? Waste. Because we need to what? We have identified some of the key issues with waste generated. We are now going to look at management and control of waste. The way and manner in which we manage and control waste are waste collection. First and foremost, waste must be effectively and efficiently what? Collected. That means every organization must identify its own waste. Every home and every individual must identify their own what? Waste. Number 2 is collect those waste. Number 3 is waste segregation. What is waste segregation? Separating A from what? B. Then waste inventorization. Waste inventorization means that you need to have an inventory of the quantity of the waste that you what? Generate. From waste inventorization, we talk about what we refer to as waste characterization. Waste characterization is that you need to know the form and the format of the waste that you are what? Generating. From the format of the waste you generate, we finally get to a stage where we talk about what? Waste what? Disposal. What does it mean to dispose waste? There are organizations that have been set up by government agencies that collect and what? Dispose waste. These organizations or agencies collect this waste and take them to what? Approved what? Dump sites. At the approved dump sites, these wastes are either what? Incinerated or chemically treated to reduce them to what? Nothing. And so you need to characterize your waste, inventorize your waste, collect your waste, segregate your waste, and effectively what? Dispose your waste so that they don't go back into what? The society, into the environment, into the atmosphere, causing what? Negative effect on what? The people. The next thing is what? Pollution. And we are going to be looking at the different forms of what? Pollution. Look at the different forms of pollution, their effect, and how they are what? Managed. Before we talk about pollution, there's what we call hierarchy of, just like we talked about the hierarchy of risk control, there's what we call the hierarchy of what? Waste control. The hierarchy of what? Waste control. And this hierarchy of waste control talks about the 3 or 4 R's. Presently, we are talking about 3 R's, but a 4th R has been what? Introduced. True or false? There's a 4th R that has been introduced, but it's not so prominent now. So we'll talk about the 3 R's of what? Waste control. How do you control waste? Number 1, they say reduce waste. You have to reduce the waste that you generate. For instance, in Nigeria, how do you reduce waste? Everywhere in the world, how do you reduce waste? You can reduce waste only by improving the efficiency of your devices. And that's why 80% of the cars that come into Nigeria, 80% of the cars that come into Nigeria are cars that have failed emission tests. True or false? True. The cars you go and buy, you call them Tokes, Tokumbo. You have hammered. There are what? Cars that have failed emission tests that needs to be put out of what? Operation in order to what? Reduce waste generation. In organized society, they test your level of emission. At times you are on the road, you are driving behind a vehicle you cannot see ahead of you because of the smoke it is what? Generating. And so you need to, if a device is not functional and a device is generating too much waste, how do you reduce the waste generated by a device? By improving the efficiency of that device. That is why from time to time you hear of overhaul, you hear of servicing, you hear of maintenance of what? Devices. Servicing and maintenance of devices help you reduce the waste that they what? Generate. So overall, one of the major ways of reducing, of what? Controlling waste generation is by what? Reducing the waste you what? Generate. Number 2, we talk about reduce, reuse. Reduce, reuse, and what? Recycle. This has become prominent in the prominent in our society. What does it mean to reuse? What is the difference between reuse and recycle? What is the difference between reuse and what? Recycle. I always tell people that reuse and recycle, there's just one word or one sentence, one statement that differentiates reuse and what? Recycle, which is what? Change of state. Change of what? State. What does this mean? Excuse me. When you finish your plastic water, do I have a plastic water bottle? When you finish with your plastic bottle of water, what do? You carelessly throw it away. You carelessly what? Throw it away. But what happens to that plastic bottle? A woman collects it and makes use of it to produce zobo. So when a material, which is waste material, is reused in the same format, we refer to it as what? Reuse. Like the okrikas that we wear in Nigeria. What does it mean? We are reusing the waste materials generated by the white men. When a white man wears a shirt for 1 year, 2 years, it becomes waste to him. They now push it to Nigeria. We buy it, we wash it and iron. What are we doing? We are reusing. That's why it's like our brain is upside down. That is what? Reuse. A car that has failed emission test in Britain, America and London, they ship it into Nigeria. What are you doing with it? You buy it and you are Buga, you are now a big boy. What are you doing? You are reusing what? Something that is what? Waste in another community. In oil and gas sector, there's what we call auto-recyclable, when slop is generated. In an organization that produces lubricants, for instance, they generate what we call slop. Red slop, white slop, black slop. These are what? Leftovers from the production. And in these organizations, when you go to the organizations where lubricants are produced, there's what we call grades. Lubricants have grades. There's grade A, the premium grades, the high quality grades. When they are produced, what is left over, we call them slop. They can also reuse them when producing what? A lower quality of what? Lubricants. It's just like, for instance, watermelon that you have eaten and it's no longer useful to you. You feed it to pigs. We call it what? Reuse. When a waste that is generated is disposed and reused in that same format without a change of state, what is happening is that waste is being what? Reused. For instance, then we have recycle. Recycle is what you and I do in primary school, or what is happening today. You see people collecting sachets of water and they are sewing clothes with it. This is what? Also reused from the byproducts. Byproducts of paper, we use it to mold. Byproducts of wood, we use it to carve. What are we doing? We are recycling. When a waste is converted from one form to another, we said it is being what? Recycled. There are some waste from some industries, like your lubricants, crude oil. The byproduct of crude oil is used to produce what? Plastic. The byproduct of crude oil is used to produce silpers. That is what? The byproduct is being changed from one form to what? Another. That is what? Waste was recycled. It has been recycled from one form to what? Another. The next thing we are going to look at is what? Pollution. The next thing we are going to look at is what? Pollution. Niger Delta steel is one environment that has been highly affected by what? Environmental what? Damages. One area that has been what? Seriously what? affected by environmental issues. And one of such environmental issues is what? Pollution. What is pollution? We say that pollution is the introduction of what? Contaminants or unwanted substances into an atmosphere or into an environment in such a way and manner that is detrimental to that environment. We say that what? Pollution is the introduction of unwanted what? Substances into an atmosphere or an environment in such a way and manner that is detrimental to such environment. And so when we are talking about pollution, we basically talk about land pollutions, land pollution, water pollution, and air what? Pollution. What is land pollution? We live on the land. We operate on the land. We carry out activities on the land. And so when materials, waste materials, pollutants are introduced into the land in such a manner and magnitude that is detrimental to the land, we call it what? Land what? Pollution. Like overgrazing, deforestation. The forest has been so destroyed that animal lives has become what? Extinct. The forest has been so destroyed that the vegetation cover has been what? Destroyed. All these activities of man leads to what? Bush burning. Another activity that destroys the land is what? Bush burning. We talk of what? Erosion. You see gullies everywhere. As a result of what? Land what? Pollution. What are the effects of this land pollution? You see erosions, you see gullies, you hear of landslides, you hear of mud, and you hear of death as a result of what? Land what? Pollution. Closely related to land pollution is water pollution. Closely related to land pollution is what? Water what? Pollution. What is water pollution? Water pollution talks about what? The introduction of pollutants, contaminants into what? Water bodies in such a way and manner that is what? Detrimental to the water bodies. Example, still Niger Delta. You find out that these oil companies release toxic gases into what? Water bodies. And the bad thing about that is that when these things are released into the water bodies, it goes round because all the water channels are what? Connected. You hear of weapons of mass destruction, biological weapons of mass destruction being pushed into water, such that everybody drinking such water becomes what? Infected and dies. You hear of what? Fishes what? Dying. Aquatic life has been what? Destroyed. There are people whose method or means of livelihood is completely what? Fishing. You move people out of their natural environment and move people from their occupation, leading to what? High level of what? Poverty as a result of water pollution. What other effects? Drinking water. We don't have what? No longer have potable what? Drinking water because of what? High level of what? Contamination. This is as a result of what? Industries, individuals, pushing a lot of what? Materials that are not wanted into what? Water bodies, thereby destroying what? The environment. Then we have air pollution. When you are talking about air pollution, what does air pollution mean? In the common sense of it, if you release a gas in a class, what have you done? You have what? Destroyed what? The air. So when you are talking about air pollution, you are talking about the introduction of unwanted substances, poisonous substances, contaminants into the air in such a manner and magnitude that is what? Detrimental to the air. Example is what? Gas flaring in what? The Niger Delta. Check some organizations, you see their chimney or you see their exhaust of their generators pointing into the sky. What does it do? It causes ozone layer depletion. What do they cause? It causes acid rain. What do they cause? It makes us to breathe in contaminated air, leading to respiratory tract infection. skin cancer, skin diseases, and other forms of what? Diseases. So you will need to ensure through regulation that the land, the water, and the air, they are effectively managed and what? Preserved. That talks about what? Land pollution, water pollution, and what? Air pollution. If the air is contaminated, it leads to lung diseases. It leads to what? A lot of cancerous issues that we have in our society, and there is need to manage the issues of pollution with regular laws and what? Regulations. Now, having identified the impact of environmental damage from vegetation to genetically modified food, afforestation, deforestation, erosions, gully, pollutions, even acid rains, ozone layer depletions, we need to talk about what? First aid. We need to talk about what? A bit about what? First aid. We need to talk about what? First aid. First aid comes under what we call emergency response plan. Emergency. I keep talking about what? Emergency what? Response plan. Emergency response response what? Plan. What is emergency response plan? Two things that come under emergency response plan are fire fighting and what? First aid. Fire what? Fighting. Fire fighting and prevention, and what? First aid. Why do we need first aid? Why do we need emergency response plan? We've said continually that irrespective of the plans you put in place, irrespective of the processes you put in place, irrespective of the policies, the procedures you put in place, accidents still what? Happens. And these accidents do happen as a result of either systemic failure, weakness of your processes, weakness of your procedures, or human error. When these accidents happen, you still need to make arrangements to be able to manage what? These accidents. And so how do you manage these what? Accidents? Through first aid. We have what? How do you manage these accidents when they happen? Do you just fold your hands when they happen? Do you just watch people die when accidents happen? Do you make preparations, adequate preparations, sufficient preparation for what? To manage accidents when they occur? One of the things we do in accident management is what we refer to as what? First aid. And so what is first aid and why do we practice first aid? First and foremost, first aid is what? The immediate treatment received by a casualty before the arrival of what? Professional advice. Before the arrival of what? Professionals, or before the arrival of a medical team. You need to attend to what? Injured people before what? Professionals arrive to take care and give medical proper care. And so what is first aid and why do we give first aid? We refer to that as the 3 P's of first aid. The 3 what? P's of first aid. Why do we do first aid and why do we give first aid? We refer to it as the 3 P's of first aid. Number 1 is to P represent to preserve life. To preserve what? Life. We give first aid in the case of an emergency to preserve, first and foremost, to preserve what? Life. The second P stands to what? Prevent what? Deterioration. The first P stands for what? Preserve life, prevent deterioration, and the last P means what? Promote recovery. The first P stands for what? To preserve life, prevent deterioration, and promote what? Recovery. So how do we manage first aid? There are different sections, there are different aspects of first aid, from common wounds to shocks common wounds, injuries, cuts, shock, and even what? Unconsciousness. But in this class, we are going to take a look at what? Unconsciousness. But you need to understand something, I'll get to that, that when a victim falls or when people become unconscious, there are different forms of what? Unconsciousness. Our environment is becoming knowledgeable of CPR, and when people are unconscious, you just rush to them and begin to give CPR. There are some basic things you need to look out for before giving out CPR to anybody. One of those things is what we mean by, or what we clarify as either unconscious stupor or unconscious what? Coma. There are times that where some people fall unconscious, some victims become unconscious, but they are still breathing. Yes or no? For a victim that is unconscious and is still breathing, we refer to such as what? Unconscious what? Stupor. And all you need to do is to place that victim in what we call what? Recovery position. What is recovery position? When we are even talking about unconsciousness, when we are talking about cardiopulmonary resuscitation, we are making reference to the fact that there are 3 organs in the body that cannot stay without blood for a minute or a second. So the response time is always very, very what? Important. The brain cannot do without what? Blood for a split of seconds or thereabout. The heart can, when the heart stops pumping blood, there are issues already. And the lungs can equally not do without blood and oxygen going into the what? Body and body system. And so these organs are organs that need to be functional with the flow of what? The circulatory and the nervous system in the body to coordinate the activities of the body. And so if there's any interruption or disruption in those activities, the body goes into either a state of shock or a state of coma. And so from that state of shock, if care is not taken, the victim can pass on to what? The great beyond. And those are the issues that happen to our Nigerian footballers. A lot of them fall on the pitch, and after falling on the pitch, they what? Die. Why in organized societies where they receive immediate care, where they receive immediate attention, where the response time is so short, you find out that these players and these people what? Survive. What is the difference? The difference is what? The time of what? Response and the knowledge of what? First aid. We said that to preserve life, promote recovery, and prevent what? Deterioration. When carrying out first aid, I've said that in a state of unconscious coma or unconscious stupor, all you need to do is to place the victim in a recovery position. That is to lie the victim on his back and raise the 2 legs so that blood can flow back from the heart, from the legs to the heart, and to what? The brain. The next thing is what? Before giving out what? Any form of first aid, there are some basic facts you need to what? Address before giving what? First aid. Before giving out any form of first aid, there are some basic issues you need to look at. We call it Dr. ABC. Dr. what? A, B, and C. Before attending to somebody, you must give out what we refer to as what? Dr. what? You must look out for what we call what? Dr. A, B, and what? C. Where D stands for what? Danger. You have to carry out what we call scene survey, where you check out for danger. You must not endanger yourself in trying to give out what? First aid. When you are trying to give out first aid to an individual, you must carry out what? A scene what? Survey. The scene survey is a quick evaluation of the environment to ensure your own safety before giving out what? Before giving out first aid treatment to anybody. Number 2, you must check for what? Response. You must check for what? Response. How do you check for response? You must check that the person either responds, either by tapping the person or conducting what we call LLF. You look, you listen, and you what? Feel. If a victim is unconscious, you bring your ears close to the mouth and the nose down towards the chest. You conduct what we call LLF, which is what? Look, you listen, and you what? Feel. For instance, I'm putting on a tie with a belt, shoes, and cufflinks. In case of an emergency and you need to attend to such patients, you need to check the airways. You need to open up all what? Airways. In case of unconsciousness, the tongue either falls out or falls back into what? The throat. And so you need to clear the airways of obstruction before giving out any form of what? Airways. You also need to check the breathing. Check the breathing by checking what? The pulse rate. You check the pulse rate at the wrist or by the side of what? The throat. And you need to check for what? Compressions, or give what? Circulation or compressions. So when handling cardiopulmonary resuscitation, what do you do? In cardiopulmonary resuscitation, when giving out cardiopulmonary resuscitation, there are some, basically we give out what? 30 chest compressions. You give 30 what? Chest compressions. 30 what? Chest compressions and 2 breath. That's a situation where when you what? Identify the chest bone of the individual, clench your fist, and give out what? 30 what? Chest compressions to reactivate the beating and the rhythm of the heart and give 2 keys of life or 2 breath keys. But before you do this, you need to get the consent of the individual. Somebody asked, how do you get the consent of an unconscious person? If somebody is unconscious, you work on what we call implied consent. You work on what we call what? Implied what? Consent. Meaning that a victim that is unconscious or an individual that is unconscious will naturally consent to help if he was what? In a state of consciousness. That is the only saving grace you have when a victim is what? Unconscious. Any help you give out when a victim is unconscious is termed what? Implied, working on what? An implied consent. If not, if a victim is not what? Unconscious, you need to get his consent before what? Carrying out any form of what? Cardiopulmonary what? Resuscitation. The cardio talks about what? The heart, resuscitating the heart, and the pulmonary talks about what? Issues that have to do with the lungs. And remember, you are not a doctor. You need to carry out your SIN survey. You need to what? Ensure you are not endangered. Check respiration, check airways, check the breathing, and what? The circulation or the compression. And how do you do that? You give 30 chest compressions and 2 keys of what? Life. Having what? Put on your proper PPEs to protect yourself from any form of ailment and what? Contagious what? Diseases. Apart from this, you find out that human beings fall into different categories. When giving out what? This CPR to infants, you use how many fingers? You use 2 fingers to carry out the compression. True or false? When dealing with infants, you don't go and start compressing the heart of the infant with your 2 hands. When giving out chest compressions for infants, you use 2 hands. For 2 fingers, sorry, you use 2 fingers. When carrying out chest compressions for adolescents and teenagers, you use 1 hand. And for adults, you clench, you use 2 what? Hands. We said for infants, you use 2 fingers. Adolescents and teenagers, you use 1 hand to carry out the chest compressions. And for adults, you use your 2 hands to give what? The chest compressions. Then we move from there, chest compressions, to what we refer to as AED. The progression now is that while attending to this patient, you must also what? Call for help, which is the first thing you should even do. In case of any emergency, the first thing you do is to what? Call for what? Help. In case of any emergency, the first thing you should do is to what? Call for what? Help. Now, there's a device called what? AED. Excuse me. Which is what? automated electrical defibrillator. Automated what? Electrical what? Defibrillator. This is a machine that helps in your CPR process. Automated what? Electrical what? Defibrillator. What does it do? You connect one to the left side of the heart, you connect the other to the right side, and it will tell you what? Shock. Every other thing you are going to do with this automated electrical defibrillator, the defibrillator will communicate it to you. You carry one what? Shock. If it tells you to shock, it shocks. When it asks you, give compressions, you give chest compressions. If it asks you, give 2 breaths, you give 2 breaths. Every other thing you are going to do will be communicated to you by this automated what? Electrical what? Defibrillator. You continue to follow the instruction of this automated electrical defibrillator till what? Help what? Arrives. That is the basics of what? First aid to preserve life, promote recovery, prevent what? Deterioration. Then there is choking. A lot of you that talk, most people talk, or for one reason or the other, food or one material goes wrong in your what? In your throat when eating or what talking. What we do to clear that obstruction is referred to as Helmick maneuver. Helmick what? Maneuver. A situation where you balance properly, rest the victim on your leg, and what? Carry out what we call what? Chest compressions. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do with the chest compression? Is to what? For the victim or the patient to throw out whatever is hooked within what? The throat. And there's what we call cuts. Hand cuts. There's 1st degree burns, 2nd degree burns, and 3rd degree burns. For 1st degree burns, what do? We begin to apply hot water. But the professional word advice is to apply what? Cold word, running what? Water. Those are some of the basic first aid you are expected to know in carrying out whichever activity you are carrying out in your organization. And last but not the least, your organization is expected to have what we call what? A first aid box. This is what? A first aid box. Every organization is expected to have what we call what? A first aid box. This first aid box should be properly stocked. Properly stocked with materials that can be used for what? Managing wounds, cuts, sprains, scissors, cutting wool, and materials that are meant for what? Managing the first aid in your organization. You need to conduct a risk assessment of your organization to know what are the basic first aid issues you are likely to have within your organization. And the content needs to be accounted for. And so to be able to account for the content, it has to be monitored and controlled by knowledgeable what? By standards. People are to be assigned the duty and responsibility of managing what? The first aid box. And these first aid boxes are meant to be in different locations within what? Your organization. They must also be accessible, and they must also be what? Monitored. So that people do not what? Misuse the content of the first aid box. As the organization make resources available for what? The first aid box. Then, yesterday we talked about fire, and I talked about the fire triangle. Yesterday we talked about fire and what? The fire what? Triangle. You can see that this is a multi-purpose fire extinguisher. It's a dry chemical powder This is A, B, and what? C. This is the gauge, the pin of the fire extinguisher. In the case of fire, you remove this pin. This is the gauge, this is the nozzle, this is the label. It shows you, look at the date of service card. This is the service card. It should tell you the date of last calibration and the date of what? Next what? Calibration. Now, we talked about the hierarchy of risk control. In the hierarchy of risk control, we talked about the first thing is when a hazard is identified, the risk is assessed, evaluated, you implement controls to prevent the hazards from becoming harm. One of the first on the hierarchy of risk control is what? Elimination. From elimination, we talked about what? Substitution. From substitution, we discussed engineering controls, we discussed administrative controls, and last but not the least is the use of PPE. PPE means personal protective what? Equipment. These are equipment worn by the wearer to limit or to serve as a barrier between the wearer and what? The hazard. And I always say that the fact that you are putting on PPE does not mean you get yourself in the line of fire. It serves only as a barrier and to limit the impact. And so I'll be introducing to you some of the basic PPEs we use. First and foremost, this is a reflective jacket. It is called what? Reflective what? Jacket. What is the purpose and what is the aim of this reflective jacket? Is to improve visibilities. You may be walking around a corner where it's not visible. You may be walking around a sharp bend or where visibility is poor. By putting on this reflective jacket, it improves your visibility so that a forklift driver or any vehicular movement or anybody moving a vehicle will be quick to spot and detect you. Now, the next on the list is what? This is fire retardant coverall. This is what? Fire what? Retardant what? Coverall. The ones that are mostly common are what? Coveralls and overalls that we use in hospitals, on construction sites by supervisor to limit chemical splash or to prevent what? Chemical splash from having direct access and contact with your skin. If there's a chemical splash in a factory, in an organization, putting on what? A coverall will prevent the what? Splash from getting the access and direct contact with your body. But for this fire retardant coverall, it is used by firefighters when going in to fight fire. So when putting on a fire retardant coverall, it does not easily what? Get caught by fire when what? Fighting fire. This is a highlight hand glove. The basic thing about highlight hand gloves is to prevent your fingers from cuts and injuries when carrying out what? Light operations. The next is my sister here. You can see her putting on a hard hat. Some people call it hard hat, some people call it helmet. But the most important thing is that it is worn to prevent what we call head knockers and head injuries. Head knockers and head what? Injuries. You can see a safety glass. This safety glass or eye goggle is to prevent your eyes from splash or contact of the eyes with what? Chemicals. You can see this. This is to prevent, the earmuff is to prevent the ear from what? Excessive what? Noise. To prevent the ear from what? Excessive what? Noise. Then we call this shin guard. Shin guard. The shin guard is to what? Keep the hazard in place. I've seen people, there are incidents where somebody falls from height and before he lands on the ground, the hazard is 20 kilometers away from where he landed. To prevent that, To ensure that your hazard is always with you, we use this finger to put the hazard in place. Then we make, this is the same fire retardant coverall that I talked about. This is leather hand gloves to be worn by people carrying out welding operation or carrying out heavy duty operation. Can I have your leg on this chair, please? This is what? No, don't worry. This is what? A safety boot. This safety boot has what? A steel toe. Every boot that does not have a steel toe is not what? A safety boot. A safety boot must always have what? A steel toe. Why do we wear safety boots? To prevent our toes and our feet from what? Injuries. Like areas where they do forklift operation, they lift pallets. Materials can fall on your legs. So the safety boot naturally prevents your leg, your toes from being what? Injured. This is also the reflective jacket I talked about. This is ear muff to limit the amount of noise that goes into your mouth, into your ears. This is respiratory mask cartridge. This is to filter in areas where fumes and high density chemicals can be inhaled. We put on respiratory mask cartridge to prevent you from inhalation of dust, high level chemicals, and the rest of them. These are for offshore workers. A lot of people go offshore to work. And when you are offshore, there is tendency to fall into water in the case of emergency. What this does is to keep you what? Afloat. This is called what? Life jacket. This life jacket is to keep you what? Afloat in the incident of what? In the incident of what? Boat mishap or collapse of a platform where you are carrying out of operation and you find yourself in water. This will keep you on the surface of the water to help and rescue comes. Then there's another one for miners, people that carry out what? Mining activity or oil exploration underwater. We call it self-contained what? Breathing apparatus. When you go into water and you are supposed to be underwater for about 30 minutes or 1 hour or more, you cannot breathe. So you need to go with what we call what? A self-contained breathing what? Apparatus. And when you are carrying out electrical installation, you have to be very, very careful because electricity comes in different levels and voltages. The voltage you are operating on is what determines the what? The PPE you wear. If you are operating on a 230 volts electrical installation and you wear a 110 volts rated PPE, you are not safe. So electrical work comes with what? Ratings. PPEs that are used on electricity come with what? Different what? Ratings. That's that for now. And we are going to carry out what? The next practical class as it relates to what? Attacking fire. And what are we going to do when attacking fire? When attacking fire, what are we supposed to do? What are you supposed to note? When fire is what? Detected, what do you do? When fire is what? Detected, what do you what? Do. You need to remember the process for fighting fire. And that process is called what? Pass. That process is called what? Pass. You need to confidently what? Follow a process called what? Pass. And what is pass? What is pass? You have to what? Pick the fire extinguisher confidently. Pick the fire extinguisher confidently. This is the pin. You pull this pin. You aim at the base of the fire and squeeze this what? Lever. And you squeeze it from what? Left. You sweep from left to right. Once again, what do you do? What does pass means? This is the process for what? Extinguishing what? Fire. The first thing you do is to what? Pick the fire extinguisher confidently. Pick the fire extinguisher confidently. Position yourself what? Properly. Pull what? This pin. Aim at the base of the fire. press this lever, which is squeeze this lever, and what? Sweep from what? Left to what? Right, to extinguish what? The fire. I've always said, and like I said, whenever there is a fire outbreak, whenever there's an emergency, you need to call for help and what? Support. So we are going to demonstrate that now, and you see how what? You attack fire. Remember, we said that fires come in different classes. We have class A fires, class B fires, class C fires, and class D fires. Class A fires are fires that come from what? Solid materials. Class B fire comes from what? Liquids. Class C fire comes from what? Gases. And class D fire comes from what? Metals. Metals like carbon, calcium, magnesium, sodium, etc. Thank you, and what? God bless you. Good afternoon, everybody. We are here for practical demonstration of the use of fire extinguisher. Just like we said, when fire is discovered, you need to follow the pass procedure, which is pull the pin, aim at the base of the fire, squeeze the lever, and sweep from what? Left to right. And we also established that for fire to burn, 3 elements must come together. One of these elements is the oxygen, the fuel, and what? The source of ignition. We have the fuel here. We have oxygen naturally in this environment, and there's a source of ignition. And so what we are going to demonstrate here, using this extinguisher by my right here, is to what? Aim and pull the pin, aim at the base of the fire, squeeze the lever, and sweep from left to right to extinguish the fire what? Completely. I hope this has been interactive, and I hope you have learned a lot from this class. Thank you, and God bless you. Remember to pull the pin, aim at the base of the fire, aim, pull the pin, aim, lift, position properly, gallantly and confidently, with one leg stretched out. Go close to the fire. You are far from the fire. Go close to the fire. Now aim, aim, squeeze. You are aiming at the base of the bucket. Aim at the base of the fire, not the bucket. Beautiful. Smoke. I still have smoke. It's okay. Now, she aimed at the top, and what? That's why you have the spread. A round of applause for her.
Hallelujah. Fire, oh, fire, oh, fire, oh.
Remove the pin first. Remove the pin. Aim at the base of the fire. Again, hold on. Press, press, sweep, sweep, hold on. Again. Again, 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 release. Turn it. No, 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 no. Turn. Turn the container, the container, the container, the container. No, 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 no. Oya, press, attack, 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 cover the pan. Turn the pan upside down, cover it. Thank you, and God bless you. what is the function of this gauge? This gauge is showing you 14 bar. That's when it is fully pressurized. It's at what? 14 bar. Now that the whole content has been discharged, what happens? It has come down back to what? Zero. This is where you have to what? Refill. This is where you have to what? Refill. And I'm sure if I want to test this fire extinguisher, there'll be leakages. How do you test for leakages in fire extinguisher? If you put this fire extinguisher in water now, you start seeing bubbles here. If you put this fire extinguisher in water, you start seeing what?
Bubbles.
That shows you that there's leakage. When there's leakage, those are the things you inspect. I said monthly what? Visual inspection. If you by annual, 6 months what? Calibration. If you have calibrated a fire extinguisher and the pressure is reducing, what does it show? It shows that there's what? Leakage. So what we have established in this class is what? That in fighting fire, you need a fire extinguisher. You come, attack the fire by coming to the fire, removing the safety pin, aim at the base of the fire, squeeze this nozzle to release this content, and sweep from what? Left to right. The last but not the least is that, the last but not the least is what? What class of fire extinguisher is this? What class of fire extinguisher is this?
A, B, and C.
What does that tell you? And what?
Be able to extinguish class
A, B, and B, and class C fire. And that makes it what? A dry chemical powder fire extinguisher. This is 6 kg, and this shows you all the label of this what? Fire what? Extinguisher. From this label, you get all information about this what? Fire what? Extinguisher. And so, having done this, we have come to the end of this class. We thank you for your time, and we thank you for a period like this. And I strongly believe that you have learned something, and you can always count on the information you have received and improve your life and your career abundantly by the grace of God. Thank you, and God bless you for listening.
very much, sir.
God bless you.
Thank you.